talk about a journey and a choice point around this dynamic with the high facilitators, and I remember the moment when I started to make videos and then continued to make videos. And the first choice was to tell the truth and honor the emotions that were there in all the different ways that came up to express themselves and itself. And so this was a controversial choice. Well, everything was a pretty terrifying choice there, because there's uncertainty, unfamiliarity, unknown, and there's this sense of being very close to death, either socially, financially, physically, emotionally, mentally. I would have these surges of emotion and energy go through my mind that felt very much like drowning, where the surge of emotion would fill up the tank. There'd just be this top little inch where I could barely be getting a little breath out. And some water would get in and I'd choke, and it's like, what's going to happen if more emotion comes up and I'm in this cage here? And this is the threat to death. And that's part of where this responds to this, because survival strategies, in this case, keeping secrets, the keeping of the secret of how I truly feel, of what the impact on power structures around me actually are, whether it's my parents or my school or my government or my therapists or my high facilitators, what that impact is having on me is being, the impact it's having on me is being kept secret to protect the relationship in an environment in which the power structures around me have never invited or responded favorably to a presentation of their shame, their inadequacies, their abuses, their discrepancies, their lack of integrities, various things like that. And in a power dynamic, the one in the position of power never has to. Meaning if you've got someone who has a strong influence, or, as in the case of a child with apparent complete control of security, survival, and belonging, your core basic needs. So you don't get to go on to the needs of esteem and needs of truth and needs of self-actualization until these get met. And so if someone is a gatekeeper for these three needs, survival, security, and belonging, there is a contract with the truth of what's inside, because the essential principle is you cannot step beyond a boundary beyond which the gatekeeper will cast you out of being willing and able to meet those needs, to survive, to feel secure and belong. And belonging, love and belonging, is as vital on an emotional level as air and water is on a physical level. And so it is a real need. There is a psychological collapse in the absence of love. And initially it's filled with extraordinary and overwhelming grief. But then it moves into the reptilian brain. When that cannot be answered, one moves into the reptilian brain. So there is not a collapse of the entire psyche. It is just a reduction of several 100 million years of evolution back to the crocodile stage, when you're just fight, flight, freeze. So your humanity has collapsed back to the point of the sociopathic environment that's around. In other words, we have as human beings the entire evolutionary history on the planet within our brain. So we have the instincts in the brain of the crocodiles, and we have the instincts, the brains, and the feelings and the reflexes of mammals. And we have the instincts and thought patterns of human animals. And then we have, if you see, and it's predicated on environment. Meaning you can take a Buddhist monk, and if you inject them with enough drugs and beatings in hypnosis and various things, basically the military has perfected a technique to break through the conscious mind and shatter through trauma, etc. And you can induce a state that, because of the density of the body, like you may think that, for example, just having all of your friends pick you up and drop you down onto a hard concrete surface as bone after bone starts fracturing and rupturing, and no matter how much you scream or beg, they just do it. And if they say, we're doing this because we love you, you'll go crazy. It's just too much to process for the limited ego consciousness. And so people do go crazy. Often it is sexual abuse victims. There is so much grief, and then in the denial of the grief, in the denial of what has happened by the abuser, who does not want to look at their own shadow. You have a Christian minister who sexually abuses his daughter, and then he hates his daughter for reminding him what a shit he is. And then he hates her for making him hate her, as he's got to go out and preach his sermon. So he's disintegrated. He's got his preacher persona, and he's got his sexual violator persona, and then he's got his witness who doesn't like what he sees, and so this gets blamed on his daughter. And so his daughter listens to the pompous sermon. The daughter watches all the praise coming to her father in an emotionally illiterate culture that cannot tell the difference between words, behavior, and energy. Otherwise, it would say that doesn't sound, very convincing. The words are there, somewhat. God is love, he'll burn you in a lake of fire. I guess the words are there. But it's not very convincing when the energy isn't there. And so she's going a bit crazy already. And then he wants to have sex with her when this is a crime. And then he blames her. And then he pretends it never happens. And she knows that he'll beat her and traumatize her if she says it did happen. So the truth wants to come out and integrate this reality, but she doesn't want to be shamed, and that's even more terrifying. So she's completely alone in a grief she can't deal with. She's completely alone in an insanity she can't deal with. And as a result, she goes crazy to protect herself and her father, because her father is delighted. Now he can confirm that she was, in fact, a terrible person. Now he can have sex with her and just say she's crazy. What does it matter? Now he can say maybe God's punishing her. See, I was right. But most importantly, no one's going to believe her anymore. And so he can create this dual split in his mind where I'm this wonderful, loving father. You see, I'm even taking care of her when she's 30 years old, etc., etc., etc. And I'm never going to own, not to her, not to myself, not to anyone, that the reason she's crazy is she's not crazy at all. She has dissociated from an overwhelming reality load of disintegrated energy that I, as her protector, have dumped on her. And everyone around who, on some level, can sense energy is choosing not to look, because they're not looking at their own abuse in the culture and in the power structure any more than they're looking at hers. So there's a collusion. There's not one person that says, wait a minute, she was a healthy young girl. Girls don't just go crazy like that. There had to be a reason. What was that reason? Let's care for her. And I want to be careful here, because on the flip side, well, a lot of abuse we don't register as abuse because we refuse to honor and attune with the sensitivity of our inner child. So we don't honor it as abuse. We don't register it as abuse. So when we are abusing ourselves, we are abusing those around us, and sensitives or children get the abuse that we've denied that we're doing to ourselves and thus to others around us, and they pick it up. And usually it's a repeat of an abuse that's been done. So I want to be sensitive, not to add shame to people that really don't know what they're doing and that can't see the connection. And, that feeling of, if you're, you find yourself, you're out on a date or something, and suddenly your partner starts screaming and drunk and whatever, and there's that horrible feeling like somehow you've done this. When you asked them to stop drinking, you didn't want to go here, and it's just felt like this kind of momentum forward into this place where now you're the villain, and so I want to be sensitive to that experience as well. But in this situation, insanity is a relief from overwhelming pressure without support. And I've really gotten to know the pressure of grief without support, because no one has ever taught me how to grieve. People have taught me to be positive, and people have traumatized me into a numb state. And so when something overwhelmingly sad starts coming up, there's a sense that I'm going to die to go into that feeling. And that's so overwhelming that in my first partnering with this dynamic, I partnered with the part of me that needed to escape the feeling that it was going to die. And so the question is, what is a good partnering to addictively divert attention from that part. And so I just kind of noticed that, first of all, that was the primary need. Secondly, that addictions and compulsions come on a range. You know, if you addict yourself to heroin, or you addict yourself to, you know, anonymous sex, unsafe sex, or if you addict yourself to driving, you know, 200 miles an hour, you know, whatever. There's different addictions. Some are more dangerous than others. If you addict yourself to gambling, you're on credit card debt, that's a more serious life addiction than if you addict to eating too much pizza. You know, once the emotional wave is over on the pizza, you can just let it go through until you're no longer bloated, and 24 hours later you're just a little bit fatter. But if your addiction was high stakes gambling, 24 hours later you've got debt collectors and $30,000 of debt, you know, so that's, and that doesn't go away in 24 hours. You've got an issue. And so the first thing was to partner with addictions that would work and yet not have too long of a lasting consequence. So I partnered at different times with pornography, with smoking, with eating too much, with eating a lot of sugar, with driving around, particularly in Thailand on a motorbike. It's, you know, it's very distracting to have air and stuff. And then, so I addicted with that, and then I healed. So there's the addiction to the what can't be dealt with. Then I healed by training various masseuses and energy workers, training people who didn't know they were energy workers to be energy workers. And this is really important because in the United States, I cannot, well, first of all, when you've got early childhood attachment disorder and you've got extraordinary levels of grief that take a lot of time, you cannot go into those places if there's anxiety about money, anxiety about being hurt, anxiety about being betrayed, and anxiety about being abandoned. You cannot go into those places. The protectors will not allow emotional access. And so it's very important to have the unstructured relationship with Asian masseuse in Bali, Philippines, and Thailand. To find people that were willing to connect with their heart, that were willing to touch me at a slow, steady speed that would not interrupt the emotion, that where the massage provided a diversion. You can see me teaching a Balinese masseuse on the remedies page. And or medicine page and remedies. And or I think on my healing page, yeah. So so there's the presence of pressure provides a witness, because my muscles clench as a way of holding an emotion that I can't be with alone. So when the emotion is too much for me to be with alone, muscles clench to hold it until I have a container where someone is with me. The compassionate witness is absolutely essential. So what the masseuse has to do is lovingly provide a pressure that is equal to the intensity of the muscle, and goes a little bit into it, communicating that we now have the container to hold this emotion. And she has to rest there at high pressure while I breathe into the emotion that a muscle is storing there for me. And what her touch is doing at that high intensity, I will not get lost in the emotion. Meaning at a certain point, it's painful. You can pinch hard enough, where someone may be depressed, I can't move, and they're lost in that. And you pinch them hard enough, and it's actually good medicine. It's if you can not break a bone or bruise anything, if you bang a hammer on their finger, they're not depressed for the next 5 minutes. And if you come near them again to bang them again, they're like, what are you doing? Stop banging a hammer on me. I'm depressed. No, you're not depressed. You're angry and moving around. And you try and hit their finger again with a hammer, and pretty soon they're jumping around the room. You hit them with a pillow, and they can't maintain the depressed state. And you can get movement is my point, and suddenly they're furious and they're angry at you. How dare you? You're ridiculous. Da 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 da. And it's like, get it all out. Tell me all about it. Happy to hear. And they're crying. Nobody loves me. And you hold them, but it's movement. They're not depressed. You see, you can. I'm just using this as an extreme example. This is something Gurdjieff might get up to. It's a little bit bold for me personally, but the pressure on the calves and the thighs that have been holding so much of my grief for most of my life, as my legs go numb from the chronic tension and exhaustion over decades. With unfortunately none of these psychics or energy healers seem to grasp this, so I just ultimately figured it out on my own. And the masseuses don't grasp it, so I teach them. And so when that tension it's creating enough steady, reassuring pain / pressure that I can go into the grief without getting lost into it, so that it doesn't re-traumatize me. But I can release the old emotions. This is the key balance. And getting people to go slow enough is incredibly aggravating. I'm so fucking pissed off that no one's teaching people this. So I'm busily trying to manage this and like, no, don't lift your thumb off just yet. I'm still feeling something. Watch my breath, you'll see when I'm done with this emotion, just pay attention. You have the chauvinism of Western influences where masseuses think that they're being unproductive unless they cover your whole body and chop you and cover every muscle. It's a joke, It's like, no, your present touch is 10 times more valuable. So aggravating to be right at the edge of grief and one absent-minded person after another, just thinks about some other thought and forgets the pressure, or thinks, it's just so aggravating. I want to kill him. There's this dance between sweet ecstasy and wanting to kill him, because they do it just right for 3 minutes and you've got absolute ecstatic release of grief. And then they fuck it up, it's like, ecstatic, So anyway, so that's the healing. So the massage and the teaching of my sweetheart. It's so wonderful being of service to someone. And again, it takes the overload pressure off because it's diverting attention to someone else. But of course, whatever I'm teaching is exactly what I need to be learning. And what I'm really teaching in her is the feminine in me that doesn't know all the stuff that I'm teaching the feminine in her. And so, it needs to go outward that way because it's just too overwhelming to look inward, but the inner parts are changing. And so that's my, massage, massage swimming as a very luxurious thing if the waves weren't too high in warm water, hot showers, and writing, dreaming and writing. These are the healing medicines, along with meditation and working with crystals. So these are the healings. And then the addictions, it's like, I don't feel like meditating, and I'm got too much, I feel pain in my shoulders and pain in my back, and I'm exhausted. But I don't want to go to sleep in an irritable, exhausted state. So what am I going to do? Well, I have to calculate. If I got on a motorbike right now and went at a high speed, would I generate enough adrenaline to get out of this funk? Or would I just be driving dangerously because I'm too sleepy to muster the adrenaline? And so there's these judgment calls. So I don't know. I don't know if I rushed out to this restaurant and stuffed a whole pizza down, would I be able to break out of this state? Well, I don't know. Let's give it a try. I don't have energy for anything else, and so there's that kind of partnering with the abuse and using it as a doorway into how much pain I was in. The level of compulsiveness, the level of addiction is the level of pain. And appreciating myself for being candid with the situation and working with it. So this is one path of integration. Then there's the other path, which is all the anger, all the hurt, all the fear, all the betrayed voices within me that have all been unseen and punished and shamed and unwanted within the cult, within the different abuse patterns, that wanted to speak in tension with the socially accepted moderator that says, don't do this or you'll be judged, don't do that if you'll be judged, etc. So there's a tension with that voice. In tension with the New Age questioner, critic, etc., that talks about, Norman Vincent Peale and Napoleon Hill, success with a positive mental attitude, etc., and all that. And in tension with certain higher presences that are not in the wound, parts of me that are, they're not in the wound, they're up here, and they're happy, they're excited, they're not in the wound, but these parts down here are in the wound. And so the question is which to honor, and what is honoring. And the typical cultural and New Age direction is what I call spiritual bypass, where you bypass the belly, you bypass the solar plexus, you bypass the heart, and you bypass the body, and you go up into the etheric, into the transcendent regions of the brain, and you become afraid of those parts of yourself because they get uglier and uglier when they're not tended to and given attention. And it becomes this split personality, the higher and the lower. And the other path is the descent, which Robert Bly talks about in his book Iron John, the descent. And in the descent, the direction is down and honoring the lowest of the low first. And so I decided to go into the descent. But I couldn't find the energy, the identity, or the drive to do it. There's so much fear and smallness of this terrified, traumatized little boy from all the abuse in childhood and all the abuse in this culture and all the women who have shamed his needs. There's just so much pain and abuse there. And so he's just terrified. And so it's important to actually go into anger and also blame. Blame, anger, and self-pity, rage, hostility, aggression, all did a mixture of things, providing enough anesthetic for the terror not to collapse me into paralysis, providing enough outward direction not to attack myself, which is a tendency of shame-based sensitives, to attack oneself, which would just kill you. I mean, the problem with adrenal fatigue and all that is all the loyalty to abusers out there rather than loyalty to the inner little boy, basically. So I decided to speak from the hate, from the anger, from the hurt, from the loneliness, from the rage, etc. And it's terrifying to do. Doing this is traumatic because the little boy knows he's going to be killed for doing this. The little boy is watching this. He's like, don't do it, don't do it. He feels all these true feelings and has all these real reasons, but he knows he's going to die because in his world, he would have. In his world, his father and mother might very well kill him, consciously or unconsciously. You know, when you have enormous hatred and jealousy, see, because there's a lot of this shadow energy. When a child speaks the truth and the parent has never been allowed to speak the truth, there's envy. When a child has innocence and a parent has lost all of that, there is envy and rage. When a child is making a parent feel inadequate, which they typically are inadequate, meaning they're you know, they may be parenting a 2 out of optimal of 10. You know, it's better than nothing and it's adequate to keep the kid alive or I'd be dead. But it's not adequate to avoid PTSD, it's not adequate to avoid shame, it's not adequate to avoid lots of symptoms, becoming hyperactive to get out of my body because the pain was so much, learning disabilities because when you're hyperactive you can't learn. You know, it's just one thing after another that's completely inadequate parenting. But when a child who is, you know, costing money, pushing a parent to the limit of their endurance, has access to resources the parent doesn't have access to because they've got their contract with their abuser, and then starts talking about their feelings, a child actually having the right in this fucked up puritanical culture to have feelings, that the parent has feelings, but they can't talk about how they hate their child and they do this and people accept their feelings. No, the parent is having to stuff, you know, one thing after another under this, you know, incredible weight of shame of you're a bad parent if you say you hate your children, and you're a bad parent if you're envious of your children. So they've got all these feelings coming up that the culture is shaming them for. And they can't talk about them because then they'll get shamed. And then here's the kid talking about their feelings. You son of a bitch. You know, and kids depend at split-second moments for their parents to keep them alive. A child starts falling off a wall, and the parent, if they go all out, can catch him. It's like, you son of a bitch, I'm not going to go all out to catch you. Just see if you die. You know, it's like a parent can kill a child, and the child knows it. And there's this dance. I knew it with the facilitators. They could kill me. Psychologically, I mean, I watched my brain chemistry collapse, and I was in a state of desperate need. And I remember arguing with Peter Sandhill at one point. And I said, Peter, you know, let's blow this up into magnification a little bit. If there was 100 Danes going through the protocol you guys are putting me through, there's 10 of them committing suicide. There's, you know, 50 of them getting addicted to this, that, the other. There's, you know, all of them are having major, emotional overwhelms, etc. And there's just this little, with the room that you've given me, there's just like 3 to 5% up at the top that can actually come out of this probability field. The vortice of influences that you have put in place are so toxic that I've got maybe a 3 to 5% chance of coming out of here alive in a place where I could be an effective teacher of this terrain. You see, and this got through to Peter. He relented just enough. He gave me about 20% leeway, meaning in that moment, he gave me a window by not hammering me and betraying me further for his agenda, and by hearing the reality of that's murder of 95% of those 100 people. That is violation, abuse, and murder. And so if a protocol of 100 people kills 10, drives several of them insane, does this and that and the other, and there's just 5 people, they all went in healthy, and only 5 people come out better than they went in, that is murder. And it is up to the environment, the people and their influences, to not participate in a murderous protocol. And Peter backed off a bit there. But it's important to note that there's some part in the abused child, there's some part in the abused therapeutic patient that doesn't ask for that back off until their life is really on the line, because they're busy protecting the abuser. They're busy helping, in this case, Peter feel great about himself. And, there's some part that doesn't ask until their life is really on the line. And it's the pleaser, nice guy phenomena, where I'll just drink a little bit more to suppress my feelings so that you can continue being a shithead and not have to look at the fact that you're being a shithead, because I'm going to protect you. I hear what you're saying, it pisses me off. But rather than say, hey, that pisses me off, I'm going to drink a little more, I'm going to eat a little more, so that you don't have to deal with your shit, so that you don't have to deal with my feelings, so that I don't have to deal with my feelings, so that I don't have to go through the absolute terror of feeling 2-year-old and I'm going to be killed because I'm speaking the truth of what I feel. So I don't have to feel terror. And there's only, when someone is bound in a contract with a traumatized 2-year-old, there's only 2 ways that something really optimal can happen there. One is if the authority figure in the relationship does not enforce the abusive terms of the contract, but actually relinquishes the child from the contract by doing their own inner work to such an extent that they're not jealous, they don't want to kill him, they're not enraged. When the child expresses all their impact and their fear, that they've done enough of their own shame work that the child can point out all of the inadequacies of the therapist and the parent, and the parent accepts who they are and can acknowledge and validate both their mistakes, their inadequacies, and the impact they have, and not feel fundamentally unlovable or flawed, that the shame is about the behavior. That I can say, yes, I should have said this was a high issue. And yes, I should have given you support. And yes, I shouldn't have said that $2,000 was too much to pay for your life. That's an insult to the role, to myself, to your dignity. I see that. And no, I am not a bad, fundamental, unlovable person. But I'm doing the work to see how I have allowed myself to get that same message and passed it on to you. That my healing work was not worth $2,000, was not this, that, the other. At that level. Oh, well, the pompous part of me, oh yes, I'm worth millions, the pompous part of me, but my little 2-year-old isn't worth $2,000. I'm always sacrificing him so that I can look bigger, so that I don't feel so terrified and small. So I've got some parts of me, oh yes, I'm worth millions. But then I've got some parts of me that don't feel worth anything, and I haven't done the work to tell them that that's wrong, that that's my abuser's lie, that they are worth everything. You see, because when a therapist has done that work, when a friend or a lover has done that work, to unwrap the shame and the binds and the shock and the trauma from their abuser at 2 years old. You never let a 2-year-old take the hit for an adult. You just don't do it. And you respond because it's integrity with the protocol of self-love. Integrity. You love another person the way that you love yourself. If you abandon and shame and blame your own inner 2-year-old because you don't have the courage to face the grief, because you haven't received the help to face the grief, the dissociation, the horror of that 2-year-old, and that 2-year-old doesn't absolutely know how valuable it is because no one, not even you, has taken a stand for it. Someone else goes into that 2-year-old helpless state, and emotionally you're not there. Mentally you may say, what would a therapist do, this and that and the other, and you see, but mentally when you're in a conflict of interest situation where you're afraid for your life, your job and all that, this is the massive level of abandonment and betrayal for my 2-year-old, the most helpless, vulnerable part induced in the psychedelic session, and then betrayed and abandoned, shamed, lied to, and just this endless tumble, just round and round, like in a dryer, just boom, boom. It's just so abusive. And of course, I've never learned how to love that part of me. It's been too overwhelming. And what happens when you don't get an adequate support is you get close to the helplessness of that child, and it gets so overwhelming that one flips into the abuser and then abuses the child or abuses someone else's child because the power medicates. The reenactment of the abuse medicates the helplessness of the wound in the short term. It creates a quick hit of power, but then it leaves the wound deeper. It's a dangerous quick fix, but it's what keeps the abuse cycle alive. And there's only one answer to that, and that's for a present consciousness who is not afraid of the wound, who is not in the wound, and who is connected to who we are, to be a present and compassionate witness. And I'm sorry to say that I have not found that in human beings. My partner has done what she can. She just doesn't have, she does not have access to all of her psyche yet because the abuse is too high for her to deal with at her age. And so she's got this wonderful presence, but it's an unconscious presence. And I'm a very language-oriented person. She's a very touch-oriented person. And so sometimes I need to hear it in language. She can't do it unless she's very kind to just feedback what I say to her. And the anger I have is that the facilitators could have done it, but they chose not to for some very shady reasons. And a lot of people got hurt in that process. And so one of the things that came to because there was just endless grief that I couldn't deal with around all of this. And so one of the things that came to my help was hate, anger, rebellion, hostility, and the sociopathic mind. Now this is a very mixed bag, because the part of me that I experienced in the psychedelic is the antithesis of that. I watched this most beautiful crystalline energy just slowly coming down. And every time it intersected with Peter Sandhill, he kind of pushed it back and didn't like what it said, until I started bottling that light up to accommodate Peter Sandhill, as opposed to him doing his job to facilitate it coming in, which is what a shaman, a psychedelic facilitator, or a therapist, or a healer is supposed to do. They're supposed to help your true essence come in and integrate and be honored and learn how to take care of it. But when you've got corruption in the container, in the power structure, the first place that light goes is to identify the threat to the container and the corruption. But when you've got deep corruption, the power structure not only doesn't have a good container and stuff, the last thing they want to do is have you look at their corruption. And so there's a blockade, but that energy coming in is very innocent and new, and it doesn't fight. It just comes in. And it creates enormous grief and pain when it is met with lies, with sociopathic behavior, with resistance, with agenda. It's just, and it's not dense. It's a template that comes in. And then there's the ego self trying to figure out what to do. How do you, just like with parents, how do you bring this in if as soon as you bring this in, you start getting into conflict and you get shamed and you don't have the skill to hold the container yourself? You got to make a deal with your abuser to get through the day, get through the night. It's like, okay, what kind of crap do I have to put up with to get through to the point where I can hold this myself? And that's, the dream of every adolescent. Once I grow up, then I won't have to put up with this bullshit. Once I grow up, I won't have to, have my things stolen by my parents and broken and then told that I can't touch their things, and all this, hypocrisy and, and bullshit. But you have to get through the night with what you have, and what I had was Peter Sandhill and the high facilitators. And I think Ann Watts said it aptly when she said, what's going on here is about as abusive, it's just a dynamic, it's kind of a replay of what's gone on with your parents, but not quite so bad perhaps. And she was right and wrong. Of course, Anne never asked. That would be a tuning, and that would be adjusting based on a tuning. How bad is this for you? Like I told them it was 5 times worse than anything I could remember. Anne told me it wasn't as bad as my parents, but she didn't ask, you see. That makes her feel better. It doesn't make me feel heard. And so, but when so the mixture is one of scale. You see, my parents were 2 people, and by the time I was 12, I wasn't very fond of them. And I didn't have a lot of respect, meaning I could see the patterns, and I was taking care of myself. And so, yes, they were more abusive, but it's a very different thing. They didn't surprise me. They were pretty obvious. Their patterns, including their pattern of denying all patterns, was very obvious. But I had really been taken in by the facilitators. And it wasn't just one. It wasn't just two. It was 8. And they weren't just facilitators. 4 of them were therapists. Some of them had built me up, you see. Ann Watts helped tell me, she told me I had a genius level of self-awareness. She told me I had great taste in partners. She complimented me. She took a stand for me in the joint therapy. And so she gave me something my mother did not give me, a message that I was worth fighting for. She did that in more than 5 couple relationships that I hired her for. But then she turned her back on all that and betrayed me for Peter Sandhill, and much more importantly for the high facilitators. Big time. So all of that work in which she built me up is now undone. Because the message is the Human Awareness Institute, this structure of words, is much more important than you. So you may be more important than protecting the lie of this woman, or protecting this or that or that. But this little box of structures and words is way more important to you. And I will sell you out in a heartbeat. And I'll lie about it, which is so there's a deep series of betrayals and lies in this. And this, I cannot tell you how much pain and misery I was in. And rather than ask, how does this feeling? What can I do to help? She went off into her delusions, and it's not about, it's the lack of attuning, and it is the lack of response to and lack of partnering. There was no partnering. And every attunement took violence. Every attunement took violence, which violates both parts. Every time I had to, from the very beginning, telling the facilitators was a violation of Peter Sandhill's rule that nobody, including his wife, knew what went on. So I had to violate his rule to get help. That violation terrifies the little one, who knows they're going to get punished, and did get punished for violating Peter Sandhill's rule. The rule of secrecy, every abuser's rule of secrecy. You have to take abuse. In this case, you have to pay for abuse. You can't tell anyone, or I'm going to punish you. Otherwise, you don't get security, survival, and belonging. You don't get to integrate the most important work of your life. Because I'm more important than you. My feelings are more important than you. My family is more important to you. My job is more important. My money is more important. Everything is more important than you, which is the message of abuse, the message of inadequacy. You don't deserve to be loved, because everything about me is so much more important than everything about you. Now, this also is an externalization of Peter Sandhill's wound, because adults do not treat people that way, let alone in a professional capacity. But wounded 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and I've gotten a lot of energy of angry 14-year-old Peter's adolescent who doesn't want to be told what to do. So his adolescent wound that he doesn't want to be told what to do is more important than my survival. To that adolescent, it is. You shouldn't expect a 14-year-old adolescent to hold therapy. So Peter didn't know what to do. And he couldn't ask for help, not in his shame-based system. He could not ask for help. I could have helped him in a heartbeat. Dane, I'm floundering. I'm worried about this, this, and this. I don't know what to do. Please help me. What should I do? Well, Peter, why don't you talk about where you got into this? Well, as soon as this happened, the next day I was overwhelmed. Now I'm afraid of hurting your feelings. Then I'm afraid of this getting out in high. I shouldn't have done this. I don't know what to do. Well, who have you talked to? Who have you asked for help? Well, I can't ask for help. I can't do that. It's like my friends would be furious. The facilitators, I have a fight with going on with so-and-so. It's like, okay. Well, first of all, remember, you should not be charging me for this. You should never, so refund the money. You have not done a good job. It's what I've asked for a while. Okay, do it. Okay, good. Thank you for listening to me. I'm starting to feel safer because you're attuning and you're responding. So what else should I do? Well, do you really think it's a good idea to keep secret? I think you need to come out ahead and talk with your peers and have a meeting, and we can meet together with the other facilitators if necessary and talk about what happened and how it happened. I can understand with your lack of preparation how this happened. I just don't understand why you thought you were prepared and why you used your influence in this way. And we can go back to what's been wrong. And okay, we'll do it. It's like this would take Peter out of control, a place that he's terrified of being. I know the feeling, terrified of being out of control myself. That's why I haven't taken psychedelics until I thought I was safe, and why it's so terrifying to find out that I was not. So he couldn't ask for help from me. I could have helped him. He couldn't ask for help from the facilitators. He was too shamed. And he could have asked for another therapist. The other therapist would have immediately seen his mistake. He couldn't let that happen. So I got thrown under the truck so that Peter Sandhill could look better to himself and to his peers. And that's why he cannot be a therapist at this level of maturity. It's that simple. And going further into this dynamic, there's the part of me that's being loyal to Peter and Sarah and the facilitators in the parental contract, because they're doing some of the job my parents didn't do. They're actually pretending to love me. They're saying the words. They are being loving at times. Anne Watts was loving, and then she wasn't. And she called it both love. She didn't attune to me. She said, at the same time I'm feeling completely hurt, invisible, and collapsed, she says, invite into my crazy world. In my crazy world, I'm loving you more than anyone but my parents. And she says that. Well, in my actual feeling, I'm feeling small, hurt, betrayed, embattled, exhausted, because not one of you have been proactive in this entire dynamic. I'm feeling alone, separate, and that if I don't keep fighting, I have to give in to your reality in which I'm not worth fighting for. And I can't live in that reality. It's too painful. So I'm going to die. This is the suicidal state that you have induced with your incompetence. And I will not be able to resist the real desire to get out of this body in this world, where every power structure betrays the innocent one for corrupt and expedient purposes, and then denies it and lets the other one take the hit. I don't want that. We see it with Trump and Cohen right now. Cohen is needy enough, whatever, to do all of Trump's crap and then just be thrown under the bus as soon as anything might come up about Trump's inadequacy, shadow, sociopathic behavior, and all that. It's completely self-centered. And there's something beautiful about Trump's honesty. You know, if you read his book or look at him, he's pretty true to his personality. I lie, I cheat, I grope women, I get whatever I want, I like competition, and if anyone hurts me, I hurt them back, even worse. And I'm a winner, and I go for what I want. I mean, that's Trump. You want someone like that taking care of your resources? Well, just give him your trust fund, your baby, your money, your country, and see what happens. I mean, it's the same vote with the inner persona. We have personas that are identical to Trump. You give those personas control of your life, well, you see what happens. So in this process, one of the important messages of the abuse process is that you're bad for speaking the truth, because what is bad is questioning authority, questioning God. I mean, it starts with God, because I'm a sick old man who burns people in lakes of fire, who will only talk to them every 2,000 years on stone scrolls. I could pick up a cell phone because I'm all powerful and all-knowing. So I could call all of you today and give you a pleasant update. I could say, God's wishing you a good day. But I'm a strong, silent type. So I write a few things down on stone, and then I disappear for 2,000 years. But you better do the right thing. And I'm not going to tell you what the right thing is exactly in all this changing environment, but you better do it, whatever it is, or I'm going to punish you. Isn't that how every child feels with their parent? Go do this. Oh, how do I do it? Don't ask questions, go do it. Oh, you did it the wrong way. You know, is this... So God makes perfect sense for abused children. And they've actually shown statistically that the fundamentalist Christians within the United States have much more abusive childhoods than average. And they actually need an abusive father to feel sane, because they've believed the father that they're a bad person. So someone's got to be around punishing them, or it doesn't make sense. Because they've believed the abuser that they're bad. They've got to have a bully of a God, or it feels like they've been abandoned, you know. And so this makes sense in that dynamic. But picking up on the anger, the fear, the disgust, the resentment, the hostility, mostly from Peter, but also Felicia Williams, moments of Anne. You know, she said she was going to love me no matter what. This sounds a little bit like my dad's promise that he's loved me unconditionally since the day I was born. He just won't actually respond to a single thing that I'm saying. It's nice little fantasy land. And my mother's ongoing assertions that she would love to hear anything that I have to say, except I can't open my mouth more than about 3 seconds before she's arguing with everything that I'm saying, you know. But she'd love to hear what I had to say, so that she can convince me that all of my feelings and all of my thoughts are all mistakes. And she's so glad that I told her about my mistakes, because now she can tell me what I ought to feel. And then isn't it wonderful? Now you know what you ought to feel. Isn't it great? It's like, I didn't know feelings just changed around like that. You know, I thought you had to be a loving, decent mother for me to feel happiness and seeing you and all that. And since you're still telling me what I shouldn't be doing that is me, I'm still feeling lonely. I thought that's how it worked. No, that's not how it works at all. You're supposed to do this and this. Parents pass on what they know how to do with their own little wounds inside. And, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to walk away from a relationship when what you want more than anything is to be seen, to be attuned with, and to be loved. What you want more than anything is to have the right to see and to express impact and move to a place of mutual love and caring. What you want more than anything is to be yourself and supported in that upward growth in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But that's not available. What's available is walk away or to pretend that you're not yourself, to make this person feel like they're a loving person, to hide this feeling so that they can pretend that they're making you happy because they need that. And it's just back to the old usury. I need you to feel good about me, so here's what you have to do so that I feel good about me. Come on, do it. And then we can say how much I love you, because you've made me feel good about me by not being you and by lying about things. Isn't that wonderful? And it's like, that feels more lonely. I've always felt that. It's always felt more lonely to play my mother's game than it is to accept that I have a mother that can't even see that she doesn't see. That's but at least I don't have that in my face. I don't have 5 or 10 actions every day reminding me that I don't exist. And the biggest reminder is, see how loving I am being to you. See what a great mom I am at. I'm not going to ask how good I am. I'm not going to ask how you feel. I'm not going to listen to how you feel. I'm going to tell you how to feel, but I'm going to just repeat abuse patterns and pretend they don't exist, and then try and coax you into telling me how happy you are about that. And then that's it. That's the relationship. So it's like, obviously, more I feel a little bit more seen saying, this is so unpleasant, I don't want anything to do with you in this format. Anyway, so it's a little bit of that reenactment with Peter talking about how he was not going to do anything that I asked him to do. He was just loving me, and that's all he could do, since his poor wayward child. This is why I'm so worried about his son. His poor wayward child couldn't see how loving he was being. I can see the word. I just don't see any correlation with any behavior. You're not asking what I need. You're not offering anything. You grumble and complain. You blame me. You say, this is not your responsibility. You're a complete baby, punishing me because you're feeling uncomfortable. That's what it amounts to. And I've been paying for that and watching parts of my psyche fracture to accommodate your abuse protocol, and it's not fun at all. So growing up is a big challenge in all of this, and so I went through, I guess, this part just hitting in that I'm not going to die to help these people. And that's a very fundamental thing, because when you're pushed into a corner where you're starting to addict to cover their shame and pain, you're pushed into a corner, then at what point does it become such an uncomfortable corner that you'd rather die than be in that corner. And then who are you dying for? Is it so that mom doesn't have to listen to the truth? Is it so dad can, have an easy time of it? Is it so that this and that can keep happening around me? Is it so the high facilitators don't have to look at their own shadow? Who am I dying for? And at some point, I definitely reached a point where it's like, I'm so sick physically at this point that I may well die, but I'm not going to go down invisibly. There will be a trail. And so that's when I started the movie project, where it's like, I'm no longer going to play the game. I'm going to start talking. And I thought, this is interesting. This movie is either going to end with my death, or it's going to end with a transformation, because I'm not going to stay here. So what's it going to be? It's an unknown. It's an unknown. But I'm going to document the unknown. And that bit of alchemy, and it's a continuous process, because our culture does nothing but minimize feelings and tell people to hurry up and get to the point. And it's been 3 years and I'm still talking. And sometimes it would get too dark and overwhelming, and I'd need to positive focus. And so I'd have to invent one, because it didn't feel like one. And this brings up a very interesting point about the pivot between the masculine and the feminine, because in feminine energy, you act out of your feeling. Well, when you feel terrified, lonely, and hateful, acting out of that is what? It doesn't lead necessarily to anything more than a spiral. On the other hand, if you just act all the time without any integrity with your feelings, it's kind of a negation of self. So there's this risks on both sides. And one of the things that I knew, because I've watched abusers my whole life, I knew that the facilitators would have a much easier time if I could and would only exhibit my worst sides. This is actually a survival strategy. I developed it as a child. My teachers in school, I was fairly bright, and my teachers were scared enough of my questions that many of them, I remember one of them in particular, Peter Cook, was angry. He was angry. He actually had some rage that I brought him into line with his fear. And so I just stopped. Well, I became a clown in his class. He was my main teacher at Waldorf School. So I became a clown in his class. And I just went to the young part in me and became a clown. And then he wasn't scared of me. And I could sometimes hint at a little bit of poking fun at him, but it didn't threaten him if I was a clown. So I became a clown throughout my whole period with him. I just had him lose his temper just a few times to realize I didn't feel safe with that level of rage being directed at me. So I became a clown to accommodate my Waldorf teacher. Whatever they would say, I made up a few phrases. One of them was, "What fell down?" So the teacher would say, "Dane, what's the answer to that?" And I'd say, "What fell down?" And everyone would laugh. And I had 5 or 6 phrases around that. And that way I wouldn't get into conflicts, because my natural curiosity couldn't let go of absurdity and uncertainty. So I would dialogue a teacher into, panic or anger or impatience or not enough time or whatever. I just felt sick of it. It's like, don't ask me if you don't want to know. Just fuck off. But you can't say that to a teacher, because then they're going to shout and shame you and send you to the principal, and then your parents are going to shame you for being shamed, and this whole abuse cycle is going to start. So let's just play it out this way. What fell down? Anyway, got me through high school. So there's a certain amount of awareness. Within my range of personas, I have socially acceptable personas and I have unacceptable personas. They're not unacceptable to me, but they're unacceptable socially. And I have, personas that get a lot of respect in this culture, and I have personas that don't get any respect at all, that are actually derided. Particularly my feminine personas are, viewed as inadequate and inferior. Hang on here.